Hello, peace be with you. Hope you are doing well. Just going to start this short talk about Palestine and how we have to deal with the issue now and to understand what is going on. So, just a few seconds before we start. Okay, let us start our short talk about the situation in Palestine and which way we have to deal with what is happening now. We are dealing with propaganda, and this propaganda coming from not only Israel, but the media in the United States of America and in Europe. It's exactly the same. It's as if we are very close to what is going on there and repeating what is said by the Israeli government. And I think it's important for us to understand what is going on and in which way this propaganda is working. Why? Because if you compare with what happened it's happening now in Ukraine and with Russia, we were told Russia is really spreading around propaganda, telling us lies about what is going on the ground, with the Ukrainian being victims of this invasion and incursion in Ukraine. And the way it was portrayed and the way it is portrayed today is as if Russia is just transforming the reality, not letting us know the truth about what is going on and preparing something which is to change the whole picture on the ground. So this propaganda, the way it was presented to us and translated in the European media was really about what and in which way we have to be cautious with everything's coming from Russia, while at the same time taking for truth and right what was coming from the Ukrainian government and supporting the Ukrainian government and understanding the Ukrainian population as the victims of this incursion and this invasion, and going as far as to deal with the victims, welcome them in the West, and translating their story. It's about what happened for this family, the names of the girls and the boys and the mother, and everything was said about the victims as if we were dealing with human beings. And this is the reality, and this is the way it should be, not only in Ukraine, but everywhere in the world. When you have civilians and innocent people being killed, it's quite clear that you just have to translate and to present to the people, to the world, the reality of what it means to be bombarded and to be the victims of oppression. So what we got in Europe and what we got in the United States of America, portraying Russia as a state dealing with propaganda, lying on what is they are doing, lying on what is happening on the ground, and at the same time supporting Ukrainian and translating into reality, into our emotions, and sending to our minds and our daily life the very experience of suffering of the Ukrainians. If you compare this with what is happening with Palestinians, it's as if we are dealing with two different worlds. So the Palestinians are not the victims, and the civilians or the civilian Palestinians are not really civilians. And when they are bombarded and when they are experiencing what they are experiencing now in Gaza, with cutting electricity, cutting water, no possibility to get to hospitals because they are bombarded day in, day out, is something which is, this is the right for Israel to defend itself. And this is the retaliation, and this is the response they are sending after what happened on the 7th of October. And it's not only dehumanizing the Palestinians, it's really to translate the reality into something which is a clear media propaganda, changing the whole story and changing history and telling us it all started on the 7th. And this was unacceptable. And the way it is translated, it's about pogroms, it's about extermination, it's about killing the civilians, the worst situation the Jews had to deal with since the extermination since the Second World War, and using even to make it even more heavy the term of Shoah by comparing and connecting the two, and translating this into words and communication and semantic that is referring to the worst historical experience during the Second World War. And it has nothing to do with this. And this is not the same reality, but it's a way to portray the situation and to put again Israel as the victim. And as the victim, Israel has the right to defend itself and to kill as many people. And even the representative of the French government, or not really the French government, the French parliament, going to Israel and saying they have all the rights and by any means possible to defend itself, meaning they can carry on killing innocent people. So to go to as far as this in the way the communication is working today is just for us to understand that here there is something which is, yes, there is a war, there is a massacre, in fact, instead of a war. And this massacre is supported by a very, very sophisticated machine of propaganda and media propaganda, using the words, translating the reality, and putting us in a situation where it's very difficult to take a stand because you are pushed into a corner where you have to say, okay, start by condemning Hamas, and that's it. We'll start talking to you if you start condemning. And we are pushed to this corner, and we have to be quite clever, and we have to come to facts and the objective facts with history and understanding the reality of what is going on today. So we are dealing with lies, and we know that Netanyahu, and not only him, all the successive governments in the Israeli state over the last 50 years, they are used to lie and to change the reality and to try to tell us or to make us think that they want peace. And as Stéphane Hessel, the French ambassador, and he was a great figure, he is a Jewish intellectual, a Jewish diplomat, saying, you know what, and this was in a program I had with him in France, he said, and he's a big figure in France, he said, Hamas was ready for dialogue and discussion, but in fact, it's the Israeli government. They don't want peace. It's just a PR exercise. It's just talks, but on the ground, they don't want. And he was clear, and this was more than 50 years ago when we had this discussion, and all what he said at that time just is now quite clear. It's clear-cut reality on the ground that they don't want peace, and they are talking about peace and not accepting and not enforcing any of the UN resolutions, any of the conditions of the peace process. They are not respecting, and they are spreading lies. And we know this about Netanyahu, but this was known also about the previous presidents and the previous ministers and prime ministers and people a member of the government. So this is one. So when we are dealing with this, in order to know how we have to deal with this reality, it's important to raise some questions and first to understand that there are layers here that we have to get in and to try to understand, to be able to translate this into our discourse and our support to the victims and the Palestinians, because they are the victims, and the oppressor is Israel today in what is going on there. it's important to just to look at the way it works. So first, it's about terminology. The way they are using terms and defining people is okay. On one side, you have Hamas. It's a terrorist organization. This is said in the West, by the way. Once again, the great majority of the people around the world and the states around the world, they don't consider Hamas as a terrorist organization. Having said this, you have Israel, and Israel is a democracy, so we know about this. And every time you talk about this, it's as if it's Israel versus Hamas. While what we are talking about, we have been talking about it for the last 50 years, it's Israel occupying the Palestinian lands. And having said this, we also consider today West Bank as being part of the whole process. And it has been said many times, and you know this. It's okay. It's all about Hamas, and Hamas is a terror organization. So if you support Palestinians, I think you support Palestine, you support Hamas. And what about the West Bank? West Bank, there is no Hamas there. And still, you build the wall. You are killing innocent people, destroying their homes, and doing the worst with the civilians there. And there is no Hamas. So your policy of destroying, of expanding your settlements, of not respecting the international law, it's not about Hamas, it's not about Gaza, it's about Palestine as a whole. It's about the reality of having a two-state solution, which is a dream, which is not going to happen, or even talking about the one-state solution, which is and should be the future. So now when you come to this reduction of the conflict into Israel versus Hamas, you are forgetting the whole picture. And not only the whole picture, the whole history, because you start on the 7th of October, because you don't want to talk about what happened before. And what is really troubling and worrying is to see our governments in Europe and in the United States of America buying the same story, the same narrative, and translating this into a political discourse, supporting Israel, the victims, the Israelis being the victim, having the right to defend themselves by any means possible. So this is the first layer, so to speak, where you can see that semantic and terminology and words count. And this is the way it works. Having said this, and with who are involved in the conflict, it's the second layer. It's after the terminology is Hamas versus Israel, and this is what I said. The third is who and in which way we have here to deal with the resistant. And are we talking about resistance? Are we talking about a population that is trying to survive? And in which way we have here at that level to understand the reality of this relationship between Israel and the West and Palestinians in the very reality of the region and in the Middle East and on the global with the global picture, understanding that here we have to try to understand what are the relationship and how it works between Israel and the other governments around the world. Not only, by the way, the West, but also China, also Russia, also the global South, as we are talking about it. Now, if we get this picture, if we understand all this, I think that it's important for us to go through at least discussing 4 points. And this is what I will try to do right now. The first is who is Hamas, and to get a bigger picture, a better picture of what it is historically and today. The second is to deal with and to say something about the current and even the previous Israeli governments and how it works and how it have been working with the West and with this propaganda, because this is a way of spreading lies and spreading a wrong picture of what is going on the ground. The third discussion has to do with the global South and how it is perceived, because we should avoid having this optical illusion and not understanding here that there are other players in the world and other sentiments and other understanding. The popular sentiment, the popular common sense it's not following, and it's not falling into the trap of this propaganda. And we need to deal with this and to be witnesses and to spread around a better information about what is going on there. And I will come then to my conclusion. Now, let us start with the question to be raised, and in which way we have to raise this question when it comes to Hamas. Hamas was created in 1987. In 1987, it's the time of Al Intifada. Al Intifada are these young boys throwing stones on the Israeli army. And this was a way of resisting. At that time, this is what they had: stones and tanks. And they were facing tanks, and they were facing bombs, and they were facing this very powerful Israeli army. At that time, this was the reality, and this is the way they were translating and presenting themselves as an Islamic resistance movement. That was the situation at that time. The response coming from the Israeli government was about we have to break their bones. And who said that? Who was commanding the Israeli army to behave in such a way against this young Palestinians? It's Rabin. Yitzhak Rabin is the one who got later the Peace Nobel Prize, by commanding. And once again, we have to be clear on this. Some of these figures that are coming from the Israeli history, or the recent history, ended up having the Peace Nobel Prize, while at one point they were behaving in a very, some of them were even terrorists. I will come to this. But in 87, when the movement was created, it was about resisting the Israeli oppression and the Israeli presence and the Israeli colonization. And they started like this as a resistant movement. Now, what we have to understand when we try to define an organization is to look at the activities and the actions on the ground, and to try to understand in which way they are dealing with the whole situation and the conflict in a historical process. This started like this. At one point, and this is true, and we have to come here to try to get a better definition, at least a common definition of terror. There is no official terror definition of terrorists, because they don't want, the international institutions and even states, they don't want, because they would be the first to be then defined as such, depending on what they are doing on the ground. But when we come to something that we can agree upon, which means that we say, okay, it's targeting civilians and innocent people, while you know that you are targeting them, and there is no proportionality, meaning that, for example, it's not because you are trying to target a soldier that you can target the civilians. You have to target the civilians and to avoid the soldiers, and you have to avoid the civilians. And the civil society, or the civilians, are the innocent people, women, children, and social organization, international organization. You should, of course, avoid targeting them, and you have to deal with the army, the army you are facing. Now, when you are dealing with this, and we are dealing with a common definition of terrorists, when you kill innocent people, when you target civilians, when you willingly, and then this is also something which is important, when you know that you are going to target civilians, this is an act of terrorism. Having said that, Hamas, at one point, they started by resisting the army. And yes, they targeted civilians by targeting buses in Tel Aviv and civilians. On the moral ground, is this a terrorist act? Yes. If we come to the definition, it's a terrorist act. And this terrorist act, ethically speaking, is condemnable. We cannot support this. And this is what I said 20 years ago. When you target civilians, and I know that some of the people who are supporting Palestinians and Muslims are saying, no, they are not innocent. They are coming as occupiers and colonizers, and they know what they are doing, so they are not innocent. So killing them, it's not exactly killing innocent people. No, a 7-year-old boy in a bus in Tel Aviv has nothing to do with this. And to kill him because he came with his family, this is killing innocent people. So this is not, ethically speaking and morally speaking, this is not right. And we have to condemn this, because our ethics of war is really to say you have to target the army and the combatants, not women, not children, not religious people, not even nature around. This is our ethics as Muslims, and we come to the common sense here. But these are acts of terrorism, and these are terrorist acts, yes. Now, Hamas did this, and they acknowledge and they said it many times. And then they have other strategies, and this is why we have to be very cautious, because the way they are dealing, for example, in the Second World War, you have resistance to Nazism and resistance to the collaboration with the Nazi. In France or in Europe. The way they were dealing, yes, they were resistant movement, and sometimes they have to deal with killing civilians and targeting populations in France or in Germany or in Italy. They knew that they were doing this. So these were terrorist acts. Does it mean that they were terrorist organizations? No, they were resistant organizations, having sometimes to, or having decided sometimes to act with terrorist act or through terrorist act to try to achieve their goals. So there is a point here when you deal with these movements, and we talk about the Second World War, the resistance during the Second World War. You don't say that they are terrorists. They have sometimes targeted civilians, but they are not terrorist organizations. They are resistant organizations. What is the difference between the two? The difference between the two is that they were dealing with an army, trying to find the right means to deal with the army. And sometimes they, as a last resort, they had to do this to resist. Okay, you can agree or not. Morally speaking, it's wrong to kill innocent people and civilians, whoever they are. That's the point. Now, how are you going to define the organization? As you did with the resistant, and you don't say about them that they are terrorist organizations. You call them resistant organizations, as Hamas is talking about itself, and the people are talking about themselves in such a way. Now, to be able to define the organization, you have to look at their acts and the way they were acting on the ground. So they went with stones at the beginning, and this was not terrorism. Even though at that time, the Israeli government was saying about them, these are bad people. You know why they are bad people? And even evil people. Why? Because in fact they put their sons and daughters and young people at the forefront of the conflict in order for us to kill them. They have no morality. They are dealing with animals because they are exposing the children in order to make us be the oppressors, killing innocent people. So it's the other way around. It's just unbelievable to see that in 87, this was exactly the same rhetoric, but upside down, meaning that when they came with stones and children and young teenagers who were upset and fed up with the way they were colonized and the way they were repressed, they came and resisted the Israeli occupation. At that point, what we said about them is, okay, go and break their bones and just suppress them, because these people are using the young in order to put us in a situation where we are going to be the oppressors. So the whole rhetoric was about they are wrong because they are sending their children and the teenagers. So this was in 87, 88. Later, they went and they say, okay, we are going for election. It's a democratic process. And they were elected in 2006. When they were elected in 2006, it was said, oh, this organization is very dangerous because now they are spreading around their propaganda within the Palestinian population, winning the election, and the way they are resisting is a terrorist way. So it's a terrorist organization. So they became elected, democratically elected. So now we have people saying, oh, Hitler was himself elected. By the way, it's completely different, and it's not the same democratic election. Here they were elected and say, okay, we are going to punish the whole people because they elected a terrorist organization. So first stones, then elections. Third, the second story, it's this acts against the civilians in Tel Aviv or within the Israeli territory, because this was the last resort. Once again, the last resort is an explanation, is not a justification. Killing innocent people is not right anyway, anywhere. Now, the fourth one was to say, okay, we are not going to carry on this. They try to go through this pacifist way, non-violent, and trying to protect their homes and to have to take to the street and to try to be visible with no arms and not asking for their recognition. And this was in Gaza on the Fridays for months. The media were not covering all this, but this was nonviolent protest and asking to be respected and trying to protect as much as they can their own integrity. No words about this. The world is silent, but this was another strategy. So through all this strategy, you can understand that you cannot define an organization only through one, but you have to look at the whole picture and accept that it's a resistance using means in order to survive. Now, if you look at the Israeli state and the way they have been since the very beginning, if you read the book of Ilan Pappé on the ethnic cleansing, starting in the 40s up to now, killing innocent people, destroying their homes, extraditing them, and killing and even killing children and torturing them. This has been the very essence of the whole process of setting the Israeli state. So you are dealing with one organization. Some of the actions are not right, morally speaking, but it's a resistant movement. And once again, if you deal with this, remember Nelson Mandela and what is said by the leaders in Latin America, in Africa, and in Asia. The great majority of the global South they don't consider Hamas as being a terrorist organization. They understand it's a resistant movement. Now, we can disagree, and we must disagree sometimes with some of the actions, but it doesn't mean that you can reduce them and essentialize them to these actions, because they did so many other things that you didn't consider, that you didn't even respect. So when it comes to stones, and the children, when it came to taking part into the election, when it came to non-violent protest, you just didn't cover this. You just cover when you can translate this into the Israeli are the victims, so they have the right to defend themselves. So this was it started in 1987, and the whole process was to go through this resistance to the Israeli oppression and the Israeli presence. So if now you try to essentialize, I'm sorry, if you look at how do you define the Israeli state and the successive governments, always using the same means of terrorizing people and killing civilians. This is the ongoing terrorist acts coming from the states. So you can define these states as even much more as to the essence of what it is, a terrorist state with terrorist actions. Because even when they were involved in peace processes, they were carrying on the ground. And now to come to us and to tell us, oh, it's all about Hamas versus Israel. It's wrong. It's Israel versus Palestinians. And one of this resistance movement is Hamas, and they have many ways of acting and behaving on the ground. One of them was to target civilians and is to target civilians. Morally speaking, is wrong, but it doesn't define the whole organization resisting a state that is using terrorism as the essence of their oppression and their colonization. So you can see here that you can work on different, you have another picture. Now, with this, if we come to what is the Israeli government and in which way, remember that in 78, you had Menahem Begin, who got the Peace Nobel Prize. Menahem Begin was one of the members of the Irgun organization, which was known as a terrorist organization during the 40s, killing Palestinians. So he became the symbol of a peace process that was never respected by the Israeli, but he was himself coming from a terrorist group. Now, this terrorist qualification is changing depending on where you are, who you are, how you deal with the reality, and how you are perceived by the West. As I told you, Nelson Mandela was for years understood, are qualified, are defined, and rejected as a terrorist. So this is the way Hamas started. It is to be said here that very often today we connect Hamas to the Muslim Brotherhood. And historically, it's right, because the Muslim Brotherhood presence started in the 40s in Palestine. Something should be said here with what Hassan al-Banna said during the 40s. He said that in Egypt, in the Muslim majority country, no violence is acceptable. We are not going to kill anyone. We refuse violence. And I am ready to challenge anyone who is now coming and trying to translate the Muslim Brotherhood into a terrorist organization. It's a lie. It's a historical lie. You may agree or not with them. I'm not a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. That's not the point. The point is that you should not lie on history. They were not involved in violent action and activities in the Muslim majority countries, neither in Egypt or nor in any other country. All this is wrong and has nothing to do with Daesh. For Daesh and the so-called Islamic State, the Muslim brothers are traitors, and they should be eliminated from the equation of the political reality. That's another story. But in the 40s, this was the position of Hassan al-Banna: no violence in the Muslim majority country. The only exception was during the 40s that because we are dealing with terrorist groups like Irgun and Stern, the armed resistance is legitimate because there is an armed oppression by people coming. So this is the only place where he accepted to use arms and weapons against the colonizers. Following in the footsteps of what Nelson Mandela said later, which is the means of resistance are decided by the means of the oppression. So the oppressors is using, weapons. You have to resist with weapons, and you have no other choice. So this is what happened, and this was his position in Palestine and during the 40s, and sending even Muslim brothers to support the Palestinian resistance. And this was the only thing that he said and about armed resistance. And the Muslim brothers in Palestine were using the means of the legitimate resistance to an armed occupation through the settlers, through the terrorist groups, Stearns and Irgun, and later the state. This is something which is the armed resistance. So the armed resistance to armed oppression is something which is legitimate. We have great figures in the West just acknowledging the fact that you have no other choice, that it's legitimate to resist with arms when you are. And this is exactly what is happening. Look, what is said today in Ukraine. What is said today when you are facing the Russian invasion? We are giving all these arms and weapons, billions of dollars of arms and weapons for the Ukrainians to resist the Russian oppression. So why is it legitimate in Ukraine and prohibited and not understood in Palestine? As if you are oppressed in Ukraine, you have the right to use weapons because Russia is coming with weapons and bombing and everything. And it's even worse in Palestine. No, you don't have the right. If you are resisting with weapons, you are terrorists. So I'm sorry, you have to speak about terrorists when it comes to Ukraine and what is happening and going on there. You can see the double standard here. You can see that this is completely the wrong picture, and it's all about propaganda and picturing the whole conflict in a way which is supporting so much Israel that we are completely blind about the reality on the ground. So this is something which has to be clear, and knowing that when it comes to the Israeli governments, the successive Israeli governments, and we see today what is wrong with you. Yes, when you end up supporting Netanyahu, who is a corrupt, a liar, and a far right leader, supported by even worse ministers that are coming from the far right, and terrorists, even known and condemned for terrorists because they are killing, and they are ministers, and you are supporting these people when they come and say and they are saying that this propaganda, even about what happened with the hospital, what happened with decapitating babies and killing and rapes of women, and they said today we are going to come with the proof that all this is true, and no proof, nothing, all this is wrong. So this fake news that we have, and we got the message. What happened with the Gulf state when you told us that Saddam Hussein, was killing babies from their nursery, and this was completely wrong. This was manufactured to change the public opinion, the American public opinion, to support war. This is exactly what is happening now. And you keep on repeating, yes, the babies, yes, the rapes, and yes, the killing women, and yes, killing innocent people. Come with proofs and stop this propaganda. It's as if we don't, when Israel is talking, it's as if it's true by definition. And when Palestinians are just responding and saying, today we are reaching 5,000 people killed in Gaza, and 2,000 of them are children. And you come and you discuss the numbers, say, oh, they are lying about the number and the figures. And this is what is said about Palestine when we know what is going on with the lies and ongoing lies of the Israeli government for years and decades, and from the very beginning, to tell you the truth. So that's the reality. And even the people that the successive governments, we had, Yitzhak Rabin was so great. He asked for the young boys to have their bones broken. And you have Menahem Begin, Peace Nobel Prize. He was from the Irgun, and you have Yitzhak Rabin, and you have today Netanyahu, and you have Ehud Barak saying, you feel that you are courageous the very moment you know how to kill and to put a gun on the head of somebody. This are the way that they are talking. These people who are talking about Arabs and Palestinians and Muslims as animals and rats and dehumanizing them to the point that it's not normal, and to normalize the extermination and the genocidal war that we are witnessing today. What's wrong with all our values and the universal values and the universal declaration of human rights, saying that you are my brothers, you are our brothers and sisters in humanity? It's all gone in the name of this propaganda, and forgetting the very essence of what we are supporting is justice and fairness. So if you come now to the United States and the European Union, the way they are supporting this, and the way, for example, Biden going to Israel and straight away with no caution supporting this version of the Palestinians themselves bombarded by mistake their own hospital, and supporting and sending weapons and billions again and again to support what is happening, and not having a word, not knowing nothing about the reality of the Palestinians, and the European Union following in the footsteps, as if when we deal with the European and the Western media, it's as if we are getting straight away the information and the news from Israel by the Israeli agency, supported by the Western agency, and giving the Israeli version. Nothing about objectivity, nothing about truth, nothing about compassion and understanding. Do you see what is happening, and these people who are bombarding, and the way they are dealing, and that and the vocabulary used by, we are purifying, we are going to clear the ground, we are going to make them disappear, it's going to the worst days for them, and we are going to eliminate them. So all this terminology is only based on something which is crazy, and we can't accept this. While at the same time, and this is the fourth point for me, it's the global South is just saying, no, that's not acceptable. So the sentiment and the support, emotional, psychological, natural, the common sense support towards Palestinians is everywhere around the world. And we have to be very careful, because even in the West, even at the grassroots level in the United States of America, and with the Latinos in America, or the African American, or even the African countries or Asian countries, the sentiment is very, very much supporting the Palestinians more and more. So this propaganda is not working, and this is why it's now so huge, and they are going too far. In fact, by going too far, you're doing exactly the opposite of what you wanted to do. You wanted to convince the people that these Palestinians are terrorists and they have no heart. Is just now show that you don't have heart, you don't have compassion, you don't have objectivity, you are lying and manipulating us. And the common sense is that they don't trust politicians anymore, they don't trust media anymore, they are very much against what is happening, and they are feeling that there is something wrong. And the West is knowing this, and the United States of America is doing this. So you can carry on like this. But even now with Ukraine and Russia, many are feeling that there is something wrong in the way it was portrayed, in the way it was done, in the way it's still done. They are fed up with all this rhetoric and presenting what is happening there as something which is, Russia is the devil, and Ukraine is the right, the good, and we should support. We know now that lies are coming from both ways, and that there is something wrong in the whole process. So at the same time, in Palestine, we know that this propaganda and the way it's now translated into words, translated into the conflict equation in the Middle East, is something which is wrong. And the fact that it's reduced to Israel versus Hamas, and Hamas is a terrorist organization, so Israel is right, it doesn't work. Because this this conflict is about Palestine and Israel, and Palestinians have means, have organizations, they have trends, they have intellectuals, they have politicians. They don't all agree with one another, but at least they are resisting, and this resistance is legitimate. Now, killing innocent people, no. Facing oppression and occupation army, yes, that's right, and this is legitimate. And you know who said this? Yourself. You said it in Ukraine. So now you have also to acknowledge the fact that it's exactly the same in Palestine. So if you are consistent with your positioning in Ukraine, you cannot but support the Palestinian and stop this propaganda, because this is unfair, this is inhuman, because at the end, this is the reality. You are putting so much words to explain to us that Ukrainians are human beings suffering, that we are but shocked and really troubled by the means you use to make us forget that Palestinians are human beings. And you are nurturing this reality of them being animals, and they have no name, one name, only one name, Hamas. And because they have this name, they can be destroyed, bombarded day in, day out, with us watching and not reacting, or opening a door to Gaza and sending 100 bus or food every per day, as if it was enough to save them. My conclusion today is really for us to understand that we have to deal with this uh, propaganda, and to be able to criticize fake news. So, as I said, all these babies and the rapes and violence, and even people who are disappearing, we want to listen to this woman who was freed with her daughter. How was she treated? How are they treated? Because we heard many women saying, oh, they came to my house and they were very polite and they didn't kill us. So where are these people who are mediatically or media disappearing from the media as if they never existed? These people are saying, no, it was not like this. And it's as if we want to shape a story, a narrative that has nothing to do with the facts on the ground. So we have to be quite clear with our refusal of fake news, and we want to check everything. What happened today with the Israeli government inviting journalists by saying we have the proofs that of the atrocities, and the main things that we're expecting, nothing happened, nothing was here, nothing was proven. So it's to a screen of smoke to avoid for us getting the reality of the whole story. And this is unacceptable. So we have to be cautious with this. Now, the second thing which I want to raise here is what we come to speak to about Hamas, and we speak about the reality. We need to come with facts and the historical reality of this movement. And it doesn't mean because we are supporting Palestinian and supporting the resistance that we agree with all the actions and all the acts. And we have to qualify some of the actions by saying, oh, no, this is wrong. This is morally wrong. But to resist the army is right. So not to put everything in at the same level. And by doing this, also comparing this with what is done by the Israeli government and the Israeli state, by knowing that every time they go to Gaza, and they know today that they are bombarding civilians, and they have been killing 2,000 children up to date since the 7th of October. So how do you call this? Collateral damages or terrorism or state terrorists? So use the right words, because if this were or was the Russian government, which word have you been would you use just to describe this? Which word are you going to use when it comes to Russia? And why is it not the same? Why it's far less than what the Russians are doing in Ukraine? Because here they are not respecting the common world or international law, cutting the as I said, food, electricity, water, and everything, and then bombarding. And how do you call this? Self-defense? Right to defense itself? Are you kidding us? Or are you losing your mind? Are you using your parameters, or your the ethical foundations and understanding of what it should be when it comes to this? So by saying this, my last word is, who is dangerous at the end of the day? Who is dangerous? The Palestinians resisting oppression, or the Israeli normalizing in the West a vision of the world which is unacceptable? Not only we are, and they are dehumanizing Palestinians, but by doing so, they are pushing and putting so much pressure on us to support the worst intelligence, the worst minds, the worst politicians, who can call their fellow human beings animals, who can call the women and the children and the Palestinians rats, and that they want to exterminate them and to go towards a genocidal war without supporting it. Yesterday, during the Second World War, we were told we didn't know. Today, we are witnessing that you know and you support. And this is unacceptable. And if we should be the consciousness of our time to resist this blind support to terrorists, a terrorist state, to state terrorism, to genocide, to exterminating people we don't consider as human beings, we will be this voice. We will be the voice of this wisdom telling you never in our name. Not because we are Arabs, not because we are Palestinians, not because we are Muslims, not because we are from one side, just because we are human beings. And as believers, Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, whatever, as human beings, the unacceptable attitude of our fellow human beings should be described as unacceptable when it is unacceptable. And today in Israel and in Palestine, what is done, what we are witnessing, is just unacceptable. So this is where we are today. Peace be with you. Hope that this will be useful. I'm trying just from time to time to come with some thoughts about what is going on in Palestine, and sometimes we need to come back to history, put the right words, the right understanding, defining the organization. I'm sorry to see today too many sisters and brothers in humanity and in Islam being so scared about defining that, okay, I'm going to take distance or to avoid being on the side of the resistance because they are qualified and understood as terrorists. So let me show that I am a human, but I am not on the side of the resistance. But the point is that this resistance is all about humanity. It's all about surviving and defending the human common values. So yes, when you are targeting civilians, we're not going to support you. But when you are resisting oppression, the only option for us is to support the victims, because this is what it means to be a human being. Remember this and get some courage to say the truth to a world where propaganda is normalizing the fact that oppressors are presented as victims and victims as terrorists. And this is the right way of putting the equation, understanding the equation of this conflict. Peace be upon you, and talk to you soon.